to get the
Or do you wanna
water
wait?
up top first.
Yeah. So we just wait?
Yep.
Or should I put it together already? I want to do it how
Is
you
this
would
at the
do
height?
it. Yeah, it's as high as it
Yeah,
goes.
okay.
Should I just leave it in there?
Yeah, just leave it.
Okay,
Well,
it'll-
there's many
Yeah,
different
it's gonna
ways.
start. It's
This
gonna
is the
start.
brewer that I've seen the most
Do
different
it-
approaches how to brew it.
Yeah, there are, and again, this is another one. There's really no one way. I see that I'm.
So my way, and I'll give you my what you were amazed about. I was in Japan in 2009 as I was lucky enough as president of the Coffee Association invited to theirs and spent a day, and they have a siphon championship. So you have a gentleman up there with 4 siphons on a stage. And makes them and they brew them, and they all were talking, and I thought it was something in Japanese that I didn't understand. They all said when they got done with the brew, "Ooh, that's a good-looking dome," and they kept saying dome,
Yes.
dome, dome, and I didn't know what they were talking about. And it was something that somebody gave me a tip on, that when you take the heat away, you give it a good stir a little bit before that, so as it comes down, it extracts this way, so you get a dome. You get almost like a pyramid in the middle, so the extraction comes down through that center of the dome instead of up on the side where you're over extracting just the bottom and under extracting. So it sounded cool.
So it's like the funnel, a reverse.
The reverse of
that,
the funnel cloud, yeah.
cloud.
And I had never heard of it in Sinnott, and I did it
Yes.
in that class for the first time ever, and I was glad it worked out because
Man,
I
it
wasn't
worked
sure if it
perfectly.
was going to work. But I love a siphon. It's in my favorite way to brew, and I think it has a unique character and complexity in the cup.
does.
The only downside is you don't really see them much bigger than this. I have ones in my lab from Bodum that are it's maybe double that size, but you
Yeah.
don't really get them much bigger than that. So
This is tiny cups, and if you're in a hurry, it's a horrible method. So, but it's a great method if
Exactly.
you want that cup to taste great. It's I have coffees that I don't think have enough flavor or something. I just can't get them to really. I like a bold cup. I put it in the siphon. It always works. It always gives me great extraction. I just feel the coffee has had has a magnifying glass over its taste.
the siphon style?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree.
And
I
if
agree.
a coffee is not good, it will also magnify that as well. But
Exactly.
fortunately, all the coffees I have. This is a Sumatra. We were talking about.
I actually had one in a class. Have you ever had an aged Sumatra?
Yeah.
My first aged Sumatra was in early 90s, and I had no idea what it was. And my importer, I was looking for a special Christmas coffee that Gloria Jeans was going to put in a special 10, Christmas, whatever year it was. And he said, you should try this aged coffee. And I said, I'd never heard of it, and sent me a sample. And to this day, right now, as I'm talking about it, I'm tasting it was this syrupy, all the classic Sumatra, earthy, little bit of musty, but in a good way,
I love it.
but very syrupy, low acidity. It was a beautiful cup of coffee, and burned through it. It was a huge hit. I sold it 100% as that. I didn't blend it, and for 15 years I tried to.
Get that coffee.
And all I got was coffee that was an old Sumatra.
I know. Yeah,
not
I
an
know.
aged.
Right. It's
And,
not a past crop Sumatra.
Exactly.
It's just, yeah.
And recently, the last year, I've been tasting lots of Sumatras. There's, because they're just not. There's all kinds of reasons. That could be a whole podcast on what's going on in Sumatra. And
I would
the
like to know
reasons,
because
I
I miss
right
my
now.
favorite coffees.
Here's an interesting stat I
Tell
just
me.
learned: 50% of Indonesians' crop is reportedly being bought by Starbucks right now. Which means they're driving some of the. Anyway.
And they're roasting it.
So I won't say anything more on that, but I have Sumatras are a coffee that I need to talk about in roasting classes and the like, and so I recently got one from Kevin from Theta Ridge.
Sure,
Kevin
sure.
So he's got a
Yeah.
solid one called his orang tang. It's the one
Yeah,
with the
yes.
donating to orangutans.
Right.
It's very solid.
exactly.
It's
I had that
the
coffee.
closest I have found as in the realm of what I remember of
Really?
Sumatras. Okay,
It's the-
it's still
it's the
not
classic-
doesn't quite have that
Yeah, I know.
that kick to it, but it's
love
close.
that coffee.
And then I got a sample. Just two good friends of mine in coffee help run Olam Specialty. So Mark Inman and Rob Steven. I think you've probably met both of them.
Yes.
So anyway, I get some samples from my classes from them, and they had an aged Sumatra, and I said, they just. I kind of even wanted to call them and give them a hard time that it was really just an old coffee they're trying to market, and this wasn't quite what I remember in the '90s, but this was almost more reminiscent of a Sumatra, like the way I missed him, and have that
Right,
that
just
depth.
a regular
The depth,
Sumatra. The complexity.
but
you
a
get.
little bit of age.
Yeah.
You know, it was there, and it was something you couldn't use it, as we talked about in the class. This might be a coffee I would love to bring in, but I couldn't do it 100%. It might be part of a blend.
Let's take a digression just for a second to describe what the difference between aged and an old one is, and I'm going to give you my bastardization of it. You tell me if it's
Sure.
close. Aged would be aged. Old is just that it got old, but aged is there's certain environmental control about it that allows the coffee to kind of get a burnished quality to it without it, but it's in controlled climate.
Yes, it's under the same heading of Indian Monsoon Malabar.
Exactly,
It's a storage methodology.
What do you-
I
tell
say
me when.
the only thing is what I usually
Yeah,
do on
no,
siphons
from now on, I'm
is-
going to let you do it.
Yeah, it's not quite a boil. Now that the water has gotten up, I like to just turn down the temperature a little
Okay.
bit to make sure it's not full on royal bowl. Just
Right.
enough heat to keep it up. But that's the catch is to, especially with electric,
Yeah.
to have it just the right enough so you're keeping the water in there,
Okay.
but you are not, which I think we're probably good. Do you have a timer? I can use my phone.
I have a phone.
I have a phone too,
Okay,
and I
well.
got it set up. So I would say we go ahead and pour the coffee in, and I
Okay.
will stir it. So my approach is pretty. Let's just get all the coffee saturated.
Oh yeah, look at that. There's none up. Yeah, sometimes I'm worried
Yeah.
something clings, some
And then
escapees.
I give it about 2 minutes,
Okay.
and then we turn off the heat and give it a good stir to see if we can get that dome.
Yes.
And
I hope
the
we can,
Japanese
yeah.
will be proud of us.
Yes. I get. Yeah.
But yeah, no, that's I have not seen like standardized best practices written for aged.
Yeah.
So as much as I've always been led to believe that it is a special way of handling the
Right.
coffee, Monsoon Malabar, I've read about that
almost-
process, but not aged
Yeah.
Sumatra. So I'm not convinced that it's actually anything other than an old
It-
coffee that worked out well. But it's possible. I mean,
a marriage of convenience and good poetry. Well, you tell me when.
Yeah, I would say in about another 20 seconds.
Okay.
30 seconds. It's still only a minute something. So, but Sumatra's a unique animal. It's
Yeah. I love Indonesian cups. I love Bali's. I had a fabulous Bali at from Mod Cup in New Jersey. Right.
yeah, I
Jersey
got a
City.
bunch coming to me. I saw them actually. Olam had a bunch. Let's go to full 2 minutes.
Okay.
What I don't know about this is how quickly electric heat will dissipate.
We can always remove it from the burner.
Yeah, we should be fine.
Okay.
Okay, I'd go ahead. And so what I do here is just
So I just turn the infrared off.
as it's still spinning. I may have gone down a little too soon. Yeah, see, when you have a electric or a butane flame,
It's over.
it pretty much it's
Yeah, there's a
it's
certain
already.
amount of heat. I can take it off. I always take it off because I think this is still emanates.
You have proper business insurance in case you burn me, right?
I do, Mike. You know what? It might benefit us both. We can sue and countersue each other till the cows come home. Okay, here we are. I got so many lawyers in my family too. That's
Okay, just get
They
one
need to
more
eat too, you
start
know, don't
there,
you?
so we get a
there we go.
good dome.
Yeah, yeah. I know it's gonna. This is my favorite method.
Yes, it's mine.
And a great coffee, and I wondered what happened to those Sumatras. You know what my theory was? I had a personal pet theory, and that was that it's too hard for roasters to get there,
Well,
and
one
so
is
they don't have any pictures of themselves
no,
giving pointers to the
it's more
farmers
complex
in
than
the
that.
fields.
I mean, the short, and I'm not going to do this justice, but the short version is one is Indonesia as a country. You know, we talk about the Middle East being a hotbed of terrorism and ISIS and the like.
Yeah.
Indonesia is, you know, interesting country when it comes to that. Then on top of it, see, look, I got a
Michael,
good dome.
can we get a close up of this?
So
It's cost me extra.
that's one of it. It's the
Look at
infrastructure within the country. The other things I've heard recently, and there's some names, nobody will know them in this audience, names that I've barely heard that I bought from another importer who bought from these. What they were older gentlemen who were known as kind of the kings of Indonesia and really knew how to, you know, get the good coffee, prepare the good coffee, because the whole, you know, part of the cup quality or that flavor we get is because how they process it. Okay, there's multiple reasons, but generally between it's small shareholders or small farmers, they need to, and then also during picking season, it's not a lot of sunlight. So what they do is that's where at some stage they take it all the way down to the seed, before it's 12% moisture, where typically it's still held in parchment or the whole cherry. So they have to take it all the way down to seed to allow it basically to dry, to facilitate driving. And there's other reasons why they have to do that. So that's where it absorbs all that. But the rumors I've heard is those two to three individuals who were kind of older generation who really knew how to find the good coffee, process it, store it, ship it, deal with the right exporters. When they died, the family, the sons took over, who had a different outlook on quality and price, and that's why. And then you add to the fact that I just heard, you know, Starbucks buying almost half the crop. You know how exact. I've seen that in different reports, so I don't know that as a hard and true number, but I've heard it from multiple people now that it starts to make sense. That this is, you know, why, you know, one of these remarkable coffees. We don't get much of.
Well, they are
But I
fabulous. So always keep an
appreciate
eye
the
out.
smaller cup, Kevin. I actually am a lover of. I have a couple small cups in my lab, and I prefer them.
Yeah, I do too. I prefer. Plus, I have the illusion of having more coffee per day. Oh wow, it's got that. You know, this does definitely have, like, I call it a tobacco note, and even though I'm not, I don't use tobacco, but I like the note in coffee. How's that? You know?
I like a good cigar. Well,
Yeah,
I would
well,
put this in that category.
Okay.
Who's the roaster on this one?
Allegro.
Allegro.
So it's. I assume, I'm going to guess that Christy Thorns had something to do with getting
More
the
than
coffee.
likely.
And
More
that's
than
a
likely.
good thing. That's a
Yes,
good thing in
yes.
my opinion. She's one of my heroes.
When I got into, you know, we make a joke about the very first Roasters Guild retreat. If we had taken a group shot, there was maybe 3 women there, and 2 of them were SEA staffers. We have a shot just of 4 or 5 years ago, and my wife was with me. She's part owner of my business, and she teaches and does all that. And it was at least 50%, if not higher, were women. But looking back, she was one of 2 women coffee people. I shouldn't even call her a roaster. She's a coffee person.
Right. She's yeah. I mean,
and her and then Trish Rothkek,
Right.
You know, Nick Cho's husband, and Wrecking Ball Roaster. She was the other. The 2 to this day, they're. I aspire to be as good as them in what they do. They both do a remarkable job. I mean, Christy, to manage and curate, you know, Allegro.
yeah.
One initially just part of Whole Foods, now part of Amazon.
Yeah, that's right. Oh my gosh, I didn't realize. Of course,
yes,
it's true.
yes,
Yes,
yes, yes,
I
yes,
didn't
yes.
even
It's
think that.
so, and
To be
still,
able
if
to
I'm in a
navigate that.
strange city or I need to get a cup of coffee, I mean, we got a Whole Foods right by us. Sometimes, wow, I forgot to roast something. I don't want the wife mad at me when I come home, and I don't want to go roast something to take home because then it's just going to be too fresh. We regularly go to Whole Foods and get Allegro for classes.
I,
If it's, hey, we've been traveling, we're coming, we got a class
yeah,
tomorrow,
yeah.
I happily serve this in a class.
I think, and they're able to get they're getting some Sumatras, so that's what
Well, it makes
I
sense
happen to
with
like the
somebody
coffee.
because that's also where long-term relationships come in, who they've been getting kind of those coffees from, and probably have been through, one of the exporters that was part of this original family I talked about, probably some offshoot, 'cause that's where that experience, well, yeah, experience in coffee is helpful, but it's that having that generational um, relationships, especially with Indonesia, is huge. And that's where you see roasting companies really able to do things that others can't if they're just buying from a normal input. They've developed those relationships over 15, 20 years.
One of my dreams is to visit Origin in Sumatra and through Indonesia. I just have.
I have not made it myself. I've made pretty much everywhere else, but have not made it to Indonesia. And uh, we've had discussions with somebody. They were looking to build a lab and a cupping roasting school to develop the internal trade there. We had discussions with a couple people, but it never.
Yeah, and they also have their own consuming culture, and they've got and there are a number of coffees that are from Indonesia that are pretty different from each other. Really,
Yeah, you're starting to see different. Well, Sulawesi's, or I still refer to them as Celebes Colossi, because I'm an old guy. Still, I would put in my top 3 to 4 coffees I've had of all time was a Sulawesi. It was just a beautiful coffee. I agree. But Javas, I haven't seen.
Java seems to disappeared, and again, Sumatras aren't as plentiful as they should be.
Right. Or not I feel the depth or complexity of them.
Well, which also tells me somebody's getting them and we're just not getting them, and they must be popular somewhere else.
Right.
But anyway, I really enjoy them, and this is one that I keep purchasing because I can get a hold of it. I did have, by the way, an aged Java 1. You know who sent it to me? Jim Reynolds. This is when he still owned Pete's.
Yes.
He sent it to me at Christmas time, and he wanted me to have it, and it showed up, and it was one time in my life, if you were my neighbors back then, I had the Vietnamese Van and Hong, and I had another neighbor on the other side of me. I remember forcing these poor people. I made it, and I was so ecstatic about this coffee. I basically ran around the neighborhood. I lived on the next street, and forced everyone to have coffee whether they wanted to or not. I just walked around cups.
That doesn't sound like you at all, Kevin.
I'm pretty embarrassed about it now that I'm telling the story, but sounds pretty bizarre. But it was that good. I mean, it was just a half episode, and it was. Pete's was another place they could roast in the subterranean. I don't know what it is, because I know Al Pete taught Starbucks how to roast coffee. But there's something there's something he didn't teach them.
Here's the interesting thing about Pete's is they roast on the same big roasters that Starbucks, the 800 pounds at a time. People think you can't do good coffee that way. It's the same thing. Color change points, it's curve, it's the same thing. But all the others use full auto. They still have to set the profile, so it's not like it's a robot running it. Okay, Pete's does everything still by hand. Everything
and that must be it, because there's something they do.
Not to pick on Starbucks.
No,
we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for
yeah,
Starbucks and all that. I do agree. I think their coffees are, all over roasted and all that. Even though I do like a good dark roast, like I said earlier, it's a lost art. But Pete's roasts even a little darker.
Yeah.
Than Starbucks, and there's a Starbucks by me in Schaumburg, Streets Woodfield. It's like a 10,000 square foot. I meet people there all the time because it's convenient. Okay, and people always want, Mike, let me get your coffee. You're a coffee taster. You could tell me what this is. And I can hardly tell differences between their coffees. Pete's roast a little bit darker, but I could say, yeah, that's an Indonesian. That's a Central American. I can pick out nuances of origin. And even though they roast a little darker and longer, they're able to preserve
Amazing, isn't it?
some of that, and that it's all done still the way we all with a dryer, kind of the old-fashioned way. I mean, it helps that one of their lead buyers, Doug Welsh. I'll see this weekend at PCCA. I hope. I haven't seen him in a while, but one of the most patient and talented cuppers I've ever met. Cupping can be, I'm more of a, ooh, do I like it? And let's move on. Let's get done.
Yeah.
I got to slow down sometimes. But he's a very patient, very, and so it's just the art of, roasting isn't just turning it green to brown. You got to know something about the coffee and then what you can do to that coffee. But they do it all by hand, which is
Interesting. It must be the difference, because I've often pondered, how can it be different? It's so different when they really, I know they had the same teacher, same,
well, same philosophy. It was
Philosophy,
basically his employees that when he didn't want to expand, they're like, well, we're going to Seattle, we're going to do it.
Yeah.
And then they started, and then they came back and bought him out when he didn't want to do it anymore, and took Pete's to where it is.
LP was I talked to him. I believe he was living in assisted care, and he still had a roaster that they would get out and go, had his. I guess it was so that he could use.
I think it was my second coffee conference. So this was Seattle in '93, I believe.
That was my first SCA show.
And I've been to every one since.
Yeah,
but
me too.
they used to have an awards dinner the final night, and they gave Lifetime Achievement Award.
Yeah.
And that year, Alfred Pete had won.
I got the
And I
award.
remember this clearly because over that weekend, some of the early stages of the cupping form conversations were going on. And it was, some of the luminaries of the industry, Dan Cox and Pete McLaughlin and Paul Katzoff and, Ted
remember
Lingle.
him.
And they
Yes.
were having this argument over if on a cupping form sweetness should be a pass-fail or an intensity. So like rated higher if it, and I could go either way. I didn't really care, but there were people who they were going to leave the association if they didn't get their way. They were so it was a lot of this,
Well,
and we
that's
were
always a given.
we were talking earlier about do we get too highfalutin? Do we talk down to consumers? And I do think we got to be careful about that because we don't want to intimidate them. But I remember Alfred Pete getting up and giving his. He got this award, basically for being the godfather of specialty coffee,
Yeah,
and he gets up and his basic speech, and if anyone else out there remembers this, and maybe it was more, but all I remember him getting up and going, just remember, it's just a good cup of coffee. Thank you very much. And then he got down and walked away. And I remember being so that it was profound to me. That here's a living legend that could just say, just about a good cup of coffee, and it stuck with me to this day. So
It's interesting. It was interesting. It would be his philosophy, and I've had a lot of good memories of him, and who I just met, by the way, on the phone. He called me up and said he read some articles I'd written, and he said, I assumed you were a roaster, and I said, no, I'm a home roaster on occasion, and he said, I really like, I just wanted to tell you, I really like your writing. So it was a very nice conversation.
that just spurred a thought of how I had a flashback on how I first met you. Vaguely, and it had to be in the mid '90s at one of the expos because I remember
it was an
walking an aisle, and I remember being with Ed Kvetko, looking up and saying, "Ooh, avoid you." Because you're that home coffee consumer who thinks he knows something about coffee. And I remember reading your book going, well, actually, in the little bit I know at that time, I was still a neophyte in the industry. Like, his reading was more down to earth than some of the supposed scholars of the industry I was talking about. And then I found out later it was because you didn't mention him in your book. And that's also why he didn't like Tim Castle, who wrote Perfect Cup.
I know Tim.
And so it was that's when I learned that was more about him than it was
Well,
the coffee.
Yeah, I understand.
But then I think we finally almost ran into each other in the aisle
Yeah.
the following year, and we're in the backyard of each other. So.
Yeah, and I like have a very happy memory of Ed. I saw him at the John Conte Coffee Museum in Louisville when it was closing down, and Ed was out there. Ed came there to buy stuff that had coffee memorabilia.
He still has. I've been, because he passed away a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
And I tried up into that to even offer my services for free, because he had sitting on his property. I guess he ended up somewhere outside Phoenix, a ranch of some sort.
Oh, okay.
Which didn't
Yeah.
seem like Ed, but he had 3 full shipping containers sitting on the property under the hot sun. That was his former museum. If you ever, I don't know if you ever at Gloria Jean's and saw, we actually had a 10,000 square foot
Yeah.
museum, and some incredible, I mean, the traditional, all the old grinders, but he had an old Royal.
He had wagon wheel grinders. Yeah, a number of those. Yeah.
But he had an incredible collection. I said, I just want to help facilitate, get this shown. Not sell. I don't want to make money on it. I want to facilitate, and him being the interesting individual he was, refused to do it, and I never found out what happened to all that stuff.
Well,
I hope it's not still sitting on that property.
Well, we were at this museum, and an item came up for auction, and it was the Civets hand roaster, and I still have it, the heat gun roaster. I've done a video of it at least once, and Pat saw it, and I saw it. We were on different sides of the room. She knew I wanted it. Anyway, long story short, we ended up bidding against each other. And Ed's looking back and forth, and by this time he knew not me, but he also knew her. And he looked over at me, and I won. Of course, I outbid my wife. And he looks over at me, and he gives me this smirk and like a little laugh, like, you idiot. You and your wife just,
That was Ed. That was Ed. Yes, the many personalities in the coffee world.
Well, this has been absolutely delightful. There's so much more, and all I want you to promise me that you'll come back and talk again sometime.
Sure. Now that because I've watched these, I've been nervous about sitting in this seat. It's not as painful as it looks.
Oh, it's not painful at all.
Thank you for the invite.
Thank you for that, and my best to Renee and you, and continued for Fire Dancer. And please, you've taught everyone in China now how to roast. Where haven't you taught people how to roast? Is there any country left that doesn't have the Ebert method?
Not Indonesia, China, Russia.
Well, there's
Australia,
no coffee in Indonesia. We just covered
Yes,
that.
exactly.
They must be.
But
I
Central
assume
South
Japan's
America.
buying it all. Is that what's happening? Maybe.
No, I don't think so. No, do not know.
Anyway, Mike. It's always great.
No,
to
appreciate the invite.
Thank you. All right, and then we'll be talking soon. And I don't want to take any more time today. I thank you though for tuning in.